Three.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. George Hoover gave me another one of his DJ introductions, and I appreciate it. Welcome to the Pittsburgh SMPTE section, and I'm glad you've made it here. I'd like to tell you that this meeting, like all the meetings in SMPTE, are virtual. The good news is you can go to the SMPTE national website and see all the meetings from all the sections. And that's a real value these days. If you haven't joined SMPTE at this point, please do so. And I'd like to give a quick thanks to all the section managers, Bill Bennett, George Hoover, John Luff, Ed Fraticelli, Dan Turk, Mike Janotis, and Greg Abel, some of whom can't be here tonight. This presentation tonight is a good one. It's a rare one where one person embodies a whole bunch of engineering and a whole bunch of artistic production, and that's Glenn Przyborski. Glenn and I have kind of had a common thread. We both lived in the Space Coast in the Cocoa Beach area. Our parents worked at the Cape. We both went to Cocoa High School, although we didn't know each other. We both went to the University of Florida, although we didn't know each other. We both worked at TPC. I don't know, do we know each other at TPC,
I
Glenn?
I knew, yeah, you worked in audio, I think,
Okay,
right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this will be a very interesting one because a lot of people have younger people have no idea of how we got to the film look in video utilizing 24p. So without further ado, Glenn, it's all yours. I'm going to really enjoy this particular meeting presentation.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate the fact that SMPTE and, of course, John Humphrey asked me to do this. And anyway, the presentation I'm going to do is called The Transition from Motion Picture Film to 24p Digital Imaging in Television Production. And I thought before I start on that, since you're probably wondering, how does this guy who directs and films TV commercials, and I've done that for 50 years, believe it or not, how does he get involved in the electronics end of television in addition to the creative filmmaking end of television? Well, anyway, I thought I'd put together a couple quick minute or so to let you know how I got that background before we start into it. I grew up in the 50s and 60s in Cocoa, Florida, and Cocoa Beach, that whole area. Everyone that was there because their dad worked at Cape Kennedy, or back then it was Cape Canaveral. And my dad was no exception. He was one of the motion picture cameramen working for RCA. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, RCA is the Radio Corporation of America. They don't do movies. Well, RCA had the contract back then to do all the technical documentation at Cape Canaveral. And technical documentation included telemetry, and it also included motion picture photography. And it wasn't unusual back then that they would have 50, maybe even 60 separate motion picture cameras of every format you ever heard of, 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter, 16 millimeter. And those cameras most of them were lockdown cameras. Like the one you see my dad there is loading a 70 millimeter Mitchell to photograph the bottom of an Atlas rocket as the engines start up. And right behind him is the explosion-proof housings that go over top of the camera. And so anyway, that was that was his job, and so I was around and hearing about cameras all my life, based on my dad. Now, my real love when I was growing up was electronics, and we, believe it or not, in 8th grade in junior high school, we had an electronics club, and there you can see me sitting there with my ICO oscilloscope that I built myself. It was a Christmas present, and my Heathkit vacuum tube voltmeter and my Heathkit little signal tracer. And I decided for my 10th grade science fair project to build a television camera from scratch. And my dad was my dad was able to get me a couple. They were 7038s. I remember them. They were 1-inch Vidicons made by RCA, and I actually put them in a sleeve and wound by hand the deflection coils, the vertical and horizontal deflection coils, and then that whole assembly fit inside a toilet paper tube, which was wound to become the focus coil. And the camera actually worked. Here you see me standing there with it at the science fair in the gymnasium. That's my parents' Zenith black and white TV from the living room there. And so anyway, I didn't win anything at the science fair. An actual girl who is one of my classmates made she made penicillin from moldy bread, and so she won, and probably she deserved to win. But at the same time, throughout high school, we made movies, and we had a group of 4 guys, and we made these little 3, 4, 5-minute 16mm films, and each week everyone got to decide what they wanted to do and who would be the story writer and who would be the director and who would be the cameraman. And it was just a great time. I did that all the way through high school, and it really helped me develop an interest in both the electronics end of things as well as in the cinematography and photography end of things. There you see me editing film with one of my friends on my parents' dining room table. So anyway, that's kind of how I developed this dual interest in the electronics part of television and at the same time the cinematography and photography. Now I got we started actually making 24p seriously at in 1989. That was when we really got into it, and you'll hear about that in a few minutes. But I thought before we do that, I wanted to go back 48 years and let you know some of the things that actually triggered me to become almost obsessed with the idea of making some sort of television picture look like it was film. And back then, I was hired as one of the television commercial directors at a company called Television Production Center, or TPC as it was called, in Pittsburgh. And TPC was an amazing company. When you think about it, if you took a map of the states from Philadelphia and you drew a line all the way to Detroit, Michigan, TPC was the only broadcast quality videotape full production company, an independent company in that entire region. I mean, that's literally almost unheard of. And that includes the city of Cleveland. Cleveland didn't have any. Now, of course, any city that had TV stations between the noon news and the evening news, they always allowed ad agencies to go in and tape some local car dealer doing some sort of TV commercial there. But as far as an independent facility, TPC was the only one. And you don't appreciate how complicated that is, especially young people, because today you could take your iPhone and a small laptop computer, and you can actually do far more than we could do with $5 million worth of electronics back then. And it's just hard to believe what it took back then. Tape machines cost $70,000 each, and in today's world that would be about $300,000. And the cameras were in the 60s, $65,000, $70,000 also on the TV cameras. So anyway, that was the world that I was in 1973 as a young TV director. Now, one thing that we quickly learned was this constant film versus tape battle back in the early 70s and mid 70s. Now, if you worked in television back then in the world of production end of television, it became instantly obvious that there was this back and forth thing. Now, my feelings were that video is video and film is film, and that's kind of the way I thought of things. But having worked with advertising agencies, it was a whole different experience. Because remember, advertising agencies really wanted to shoot motion picture film. They didn't really care about video. Video became the second choice. If you were an ad agency person, a writer, an art director or something, you wanted to shoot a commercial in 35 millimeter and have that be your project. But video came into the picture because either the budgets were lower or because the time frame. You had to deliver the commercial maybe the next week or maybe in just a couple days. So that became video. But we had to start to make things look like we had to try to do things that made it look a little more like film. And we did some early attempts because ad agencies insisted on it. They were reading Ad Age magazine. If you worked in an ad agency, Ad Age was the Bible back then, Advertising Age magazine. Filmmakers had American Cinematographer, and video people, I think videography existed back then. But all these magazines had these articles that said, when will video finally replace film? And another one might be, what to do on your next video commercial shoot to make it look more like film. And so we had to address that at TPC, or at least the commercial people did. And we tried to do some early attempts to make things look filmic or make it look more like video, or at least make the ad agencies think it looked more like video. And I got a couple examples of these. The first one that I know of was the fog filter and diffusion filter. And believe it or not, for what that looks like now, that was a pretty realistically common look. If you worked in television back then, they used to crush the black levels some, but that hazy look, which I kind of always thought looked like a camera with cataract vision or something, but that was a common thing. And the next thing was women's sheer black pantyhose. And this was always fun because I had to go in the store, either into a, into a department store or something, to pick up these things, and it was always awkward. But you always bought queen size because you got the most material on the queen size, and they were the same prices for the skinny girls. So anyway, you would take this stuff, cut apart the part of the leggings, and stretch it onto a filter frame, and this produced this look. And I can remember being in an ad agency, specifically Marsteller Advertising, and having the ad agency guys, the art director, specifically look over at me. Now, here I am, the 23-and-a-half-year-old junior director. And he says, now, Glenn, what can we do to get rid of some of the harshness of video and to make it look more like film? And what can you put on the lenses and things? And the standard answer was, we have a whole selection of things, and we'll try different things, and we'll all see it on the monitor, and we can decide what looks best. So anyway, that was the standard answer. But anyway, these pantyhose things were very, very popular. Then, in 1973, an interesting thing happened, because we got a job that I was going to direct from an ad agency that's right outside of Detroit. The ad agency was in Southfield, Michigan. The ad agency is still there, by the way. And our sales rep told the agency that to create a really good look, we would be using film lenses on the shoot. Well, as you may or may not know, a film lens doesn't just fit on a television camera. And so anyway, there was a guy that we rented from him a film lens adapter. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this. Now, this is a piece of PVC pipe, but this is 14 inches long, and that's how long this particular thing was. And on one end of the thing, it had the female for a standard Nikon lens. Any Nikon F series lens would fit on the one end of it, and in the other end, he had it modified to work on the Bosch television camera. And TPC had a handheld camera called a Bosch Fernseh KCR40, and that was a 3-plumicon camera that had 1-inch plumicons. And anyway, we rented this thing from this guy, took it back to Pittsburgh. We were up there for a casting session, and we literally went over and picked it up, and then headed back to Pittsburgh on Allegheny Airlines back then, of course. And the following day, I brought it in and handed the adapter and several lenses that I had at home, Nikon lenses, and to a guy named Ron Stutzman. Now, Ron unfortunately has passed away, but Ron at the time was the senior video person at TPC, and he was in charge of cameras and camera alignment and all that stuff. And I said, here's the thing we were talking about that we want to use for tomorrow's project. And so he looked at it and, of course, acted sort of displeased with it. And he said, okay, all right, I'll talk to you. Anyway, so I went up to my office, and maybe not five, maybe 15 minutes later, I get a call of the page, Glenn, come on down to the studio. So I go down there, and there's the Bosch camera on a tripod, and it's pointed at a standard grayscale chart that you're familiar with, and it's on a monitor. And I said, oh, wow, Ron, you already got it working. And he said, well, look carefully at it. And I said, well, anyway, the picture was upside down. So the picture came out of it, flipped upside down. So suddenly we were faced with the fact we had to shoot with this the next day. And first thing I thought of is, can the cameraman actually hold the camera upside down or what? Anyway, that became ridiculous. He said, let me work on it. Go away, let me work on it. So, and he did work on it. He took the various the deflection coils for the red, green, and blue channels and swapped the polarity of them so that it literally scanned the plumicons backwards. So he got the thing working. And the next day, we went and did this shoot. I had a pretty detailed shot list, and the camera was extremely awkward because it ended up being almost 3 feet long from the end of the lens to the back of the camera. But we made it through the day, and the clients, they seemed to be okay with it. And afterward, at TPC, what we would always do is we'd come back from a shoot, and then we'd hand the tapes to the editing guys, and we would take the client to dinner so that they could get the edit set up for the edit. And we'd come back from dinner and then edit if we had to till midnight. But we finished the spot, and it was the first time that I'd ever seen a client really, really happy because he thought what we were doing looked more like film. I mean, it was an interesting reaction. And anyway, I was able to find a 2-inch copy of that original spot from 1973, and I sent it to a friend of mine in Nashville who converted it quickly to a file for me. So I wanted to play that for you now. Now this is from 1973, and as I said, it was photographed on the Bosch KCR 40 television Plumicon TV camera with the film lens adapter.
Don't misplace your special credit union mailing about new family group life, too. The new life insurance plan that can give you up to $20,000 protection. Cover you for life, insure your spouse, and cover your kids to age 23. All for $1 a week. Watch your mail. It's important. Or stop in at your credit union. Your friend for life.
So anyway, that was the original commercial from back then. And it made me totally realize that if given any kind of a choice, ad agency people, the creative people at ad agencies, always would prefer to shoot on like 35 millimeter movie film rather than a standard interlaced, standard def TV camera. And that became, just planted in my head at the time. But at the same time, from having worked at TPC for 2 years, without question, videotape was the best way to do post-production for film-originated TV commercials. And clients did not mind. As a matter of fact, they liked videotape editing because they got to see stuff right away and they got to input changes if there was a change. So that became a what would you call it? An accepted thing to shoot film and finish on tape. Anyway, 46 years ago, Paul Hartwick and I decided to leave TPC and start our own company called Hartwick Przyborski Productions. And the entire reason for that company and the entire goal for what it was would be to shoot 35 millimeter film primarily. Also, we did a lot of 16 stuff, but to just shoot TV commercials. So I didn't care about any corporate videos or any of that stuff, just TV spots, and then be able to turn the spots around quickly and take advantage of the videotape for post-production. And here's why. All of our competitors back then were traditional filmmakers in the world of TV commercials. And I was so surprised to learn so many different things. I became friends with John Pitka, and John Pitka and his brother Joe Pitka were big-time TV commercial guys. They introduced Bud Light. They were the Budweiser, Clydesdales, Gallo wines, all these, major clients. So anyway, they were out of Pittsburgh, and frequently we would bid against them, and frequently they would win the bid. But I asked him, how did you do post-production when it was on film? How could you do that? And he explained to me the whole process. And anyway, what they were stuck with was that when they did a job, it traditionally took 3 to 4 weeks from the time the shoot was finished till the time the final product was delivered to the ad agency ready for duplication, typically on 2-inch tape at that point. So that was today. Imagine today if you were going to tell a client it's going to be 3.5 weeks from the time we finish the shoot till the time you could air your TV ad. They would tell you to take a hike. Anyway, Paul Hartwick and I, we pioneered this way of doing things where we could turn around a 35 millimeter commercial in literally 5 days. And 5 days, 5 working days from the time the shoot was over till the time the tape ready for someone to duplicate for TV stations. And so, that became quite a successful thing. We were shooting tons of commercials. I like to think that people were using us because they thought we were so creative or whatever. But in reality, quite a few of the jobs we got were we were the only ones that could turn the job around that fast and originate the job on movie film. And so anyway, that's how things worked out there with us. As a matter of fact, it was so unique, the process we were doing, and today it seems like Mr. Obvious, but back then it was so unique to solely focus shooting film for total tape production that back in the late 70s, I think this was 1979, Kodak did this big 3-page spread on us on their national magazine on how you could turn around a project as quickly as we did. And of course they did it because they wanted other people to start using this process, and of course buying movie film from Kodak. And anyway, that's what happened there. Now, Paul and Hartwick and I split up and left each other back in 1987. But in 1989, and this is where the beginnings of this actual 24P's invention happens. I developed a relationship with a new partner, Jim DeVincentis, and Jim is a quite talented producer, and he's been around the world a few times. And anyway, we picked up right where we left off. Of course, the equipment was newer, and the transfer stuff was all to 1-inch at that time, and also with the newer Ranks and Tells, we were using the turbo Ranks and Tells and the Bosch FDL 60s and all that type of equipment. But when we started to analyze particular jobs, we realized a couple things. And number one, the biggest expense we were doing was 35 millimeter movie film, followed by the processing and the setup for transfer, and then the $350 an hour film to tape transfers, and then of course all the FedEx shipping for overnight cost. And then of course when you did a shoot and you did the transfer, you had to be there because the colorist had no idea that certain colors were important or whatever. So it meant flying to the film transfer and hopefully being able to fly out that same night if the flight didn't get canceled or anything. So it made me think to myself, there's got to be a better way of doing this. Now, as I said, I always followed the electronics world in addition to the television world and the cinematography type world. And by this time in 1989, as most of you might know, the Plemicon tubes and the Vidicons and the Saticons were all gone. Every television camera now had CCD imagers in there for the red, green, and blue channels. And so solid state replaced tubes. And they were so much better. But they were still an interlaced signal and everything like that. And I thought to myself, well, we've got to have some technology now to simulate a movie film, and since I'm only looking to simulate a movie film that has been transferred to tape. I'm not even looking at it to do something that's going to be, into a theater or something. And this became the start of 24p. And in 1989, I realized that something could be done here, and I didn't know exactly what it would be, but I got myself involved with a couple guys who were CMU graduates. And these guys were techno computer wizard type people. And I tried to explain to them what I was trying to do. And they thought it was interesting, but they didn't realize there was that much difference between film and video. And I later found out that neither of them watched TV. So that's the reason they didn't think of that. So anyway, I got to them involved, and I said, what we should do is do a project that we'll put together that will actually quantize what the difference is between film and videotape. And so we did some early experiments. And what I did was I mounted a television camera, a broadcast quality CCD TV camera, right next to a 35 millimeter film camera. And what we did was we put the two side by side. I made sure the lens heights were pretty much exactly the same. And we thought, we'll shoot a dramatic situation, a improv thing. That's Debbie Doherty there, the woman. She used to be my assistant director, but she now has a company that reps talent. And one of our crew guys, Scott, played the guy against her. And we shot a complete little 3-minute dramatic thing where everything was shot at exactly the same time on a videotape camera. At the same time, in the same instance, it was being shot on motion picture film. And what I did was I said, let's do this in black and white for a bunch of reasons, because color is so subjective. It's so subjective. You could have two identical videos or whatever, one colored differently than the other, and the audience will totally tell you that this thing works so much better in video, or so much better on the first one rather than the second one at all. So I said, let's do black and white so we can just look at the image quality and the image itself. And I took the television camera and we ran it into what used to be called green tie, but let's just say luminescence channel only was feeding the signal. And of course we were adding, the burst to it so it could be recorded on 1 inch. And the 35 millimeter movie camera had standard color film. And I tried to frame every shot exactly the same so that the size proportions were the same, basic exposure was the same. Because back in the early days, people would always say, well, the lighting on film is so much better than the lighting on video. And that's one of the reasons that film looks so much, well, we wanted the identical lighting. So these were all shot at exactly the same time, exactly the same point in time. So anyway, we shot a 3-minute sequence, and then we went to TPC after the film was processed, and that's Marty Scoff there, who unfortunately has passed away also. Marty was in charge of they had a ranks and tell room, and they converted movie film to videotape. And I told Marty, I said, Marty, when you're doing this, pretend you're doing a movie in black and white. Whatever anyone in the room says, don't worry about it. Set up the contours and the contrast and the gamma and everything, just like you would on a nice, good-looking 35 millimeter movie film. And he did that. He did a really good job for us. And anyway, we ended up with 2 identical versions of that same exact shoot. I kept the same soundtrack on both of them so that the sound wouldn't be something that fooled you from one to the other. And we started thinking about what the differences were between film and tape. And I thought to myself, there's 2 real differences, and we all agreed on this. And what I call the temporal cadence of film. When film is shot, everyone knows if a camera has a shutter and all this other stuff and runs at 24 frames. But what you don't think sometimes is the fact that when a camera is shooting a scene, then the shutter shuts. Well, while that shutter is shut and the film is advancing, action and life is going on at the same time. So if a person's walking, you may have shut off the picture, but he's still walking, he's still moving. So things are happening, and a normal movie camera has what's called a 180-degree shutter. And that means if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you're going to take a 48th of a second exposure, then a 48th of a second is going to be blanked out, and then there's going to be another 48th, another blank, another 48th. So it's like literally individual still photos with the same time frame between them that you had as the image, if you can follow along with that. And that's totally different than the way a video camera works, which a normal NTSC back then, the standard def camera running interlaced, of course you're doing 60 fields per second, and a field is nothing more than a half resolution frame for all practical purposes. So there was literally no time between the frames, and that would create a smooth feeling when you pan left and right as opposed to the individual frame look. And anyway, that, in my opinion, was the main difference between film origination and video origination of the same type of product. Now, of course, there was a difference in the depth of field because, of course, the 35 millimeter camera was shooting a 24 millimeter wide image, and the videotape camera that we were using was using 2/3 inch CCDs, which are actually smaller than 2/3 of an inch. And so that camera had a much wider depth of field than the tighter depth of field that the movie camera had. But anyway, a lot of people were telling me at the time, well, the gamma setting of the gamma curve on film is so much different. Well, you could simulate that same gamma curve on a broadcast TV camera if you wanted, and you'd get a nice, good-looking, dramatic image. But that wasn't the giveaway that it was film. To me, it was the temporal cadence of that film. And so the next thing we did was we got together and I said, let's establish two simple goals. Now, one thing to remember, I had absolutely no interest or any concept that we would build a television camera and attempt to sell a camera or do, like go on the market with a TV camera or anything. We were just looking at creating what I would call a technology demonstrator, a camera that people in the world of making TV cameras could say, oh, I can see what you're talking about here. And that's what we were trying to do. So we established two goals. First, I wanted to emulate the look and feel of motion picture film that had been transferred to video. And that transferred to video is key. All I cared about was standard definition. I didn't care about high def. Now, high def was being talked about. I think there was this thing called the Muse system, M-U-S-E, and NHK was doing some things and all. But not a single soul in the United States that I knew of had a high definition TV at home. And all I cared about was standard definition and making something that would work. And I also insisted that it be compatible with NTSC TV standards. And it had to be able to be recorded on a standard recorder of any sort, 1 inch or whatever you wanted to use. And it had to be able to run through a switcher or a routing switcher or a switcher. In other words, I didn't want to create a unique format, which people have tried in the past. And that's a really difficult thing. You got to be as big as a Sony or something like that to do anything like that. So anyway, that's the way we started out. And the next thing that happened, and since as I mentioned, I follow along with the world of what's out there and what isn't for electronics. We found that there was a company making an industrial camera. Now, industrial cameras are those ones you see typically on a microscope in a lab. They're about 6 inches long, they're about 2.5 inches wide and about 1 inch high, and they always usually have a C-mount lens holder on the front. And there was a company out in California, I believe it was, that in the back of a magazine was talking about they were doing a progressive scan. Of course, it was standard definition, but they were doing 2 progressive scans at a time. They were shooting 60 progressive frames per second. So 60 full progressive frames per second instead of the normal 30, for NTSC. And I'm rounding off the numbers. Obviously, it's 2997 and 5994. But anyway, theirs could do 60 progressive frames. So I thought to myself, well, this is a great opportunity here, because what if we take that 60 frames per second and we throw away every other frame. So we take frame 1, throw away frame 2, pick up frame 3, throw away frame 4. And I explained this to the guys that we had working with us. And they were able to buy, I guess it was I guess they're called frame capture cards or something. It goes in a computer. And they were able to have the software to do this, where you picked frame 1, held it for the 30th, or for the frame, picked frame 3, and basically skip one frame at a time. And this worked unusually well. And now, of course, for those of you who are electronics people and people are thinking, wait a minute, that's not 24p, that would be 30p. And that's true. Our first test and our first experiment was a 30p progressive camera system. And of course it was black and white, and of course it was standard definition. And we put this thing together, and I was pretty impressed with what it looked like. I found some things when watching the image that we were putting out that the grain structure, the noise structure on a progressive imager running the way we were running it looked very much like the grain of motion picture film. As a matter of fact, it looked very much like Tri-X film. If you're familiar with still photography, the Tri-X is a standard 35 millimeter from the old days still camera film. Anyway, we took that Tri-X, or that footage, and we recorded several different people. We had a couple actors I had one woman lean against a window in our offices, and she did a little dramatic impromptu thing about her life and stuff, talking about it. And we thought, this looks, it isn't exactly like 24p film, but it looks pretty much like something. It does not look like, standard interlaced video. And anyway, that's kind of as far as it would have gone. We were impressed by it and thought it was okay. And anyway, at the time, you had to remember, I'm directing and filming TV ads all around the country, and these other two guys are working at a computer company, and so we're not doing this every day. We're doing this every once in a while when we get together talking about it, and these guys are working on different parts of the electronics on their own at home. And anyway, this went on for a while, and then all of a sudden, I get a call from a guy named Chris Labash. And Chris Labash he's the creative director at Ketchum Advertising at the time. And I know you guys are not into the world of advertising, but Ketchum was the biggest ad agency in all of Pennsylvania. They happened to be in Pittsburgh, but back then they were handling 3M. They were handling Digital Equipment Company. They were handling the accounts for Nationwide Insurance and just tons of accounts. They were a big-time agency, the biggest in Pennsylvania. Well, when Chris Labash calls you and wants to talk about a project, you certainly jump on with him. And he stopped by our office, which was only a few blocks away from where Ketchum was in Gateway 4. And he's talking to me about the fact that he wants to do a thrift drug campaign for J.C. Penney's had a division called Thrift Drug back then. They were throughout the mid-Atlantic states. And he said, but I want to do it in black and white. I want to do these testimonials in black and white. And I didn't know if you had to use actual black and white film, or whether when color film is stripped of its color, does it still look like real black and white? So I played him one of these tapes that we did on 1-inch tape with these people. And as I'm playing it, he goes, well, what type of film is that? And I said, well, it isn't really film. It's this project we've been working on for a while. And he said, well, can we use that? Because that'll save us from having to constantly change rolls of film every 10 minutes. And so anyway, to make a long story short and to cut to the chase on that, we ended up doing 6 big-time regional ads for Thrift Drugs. They were edited over at Delia Witkowski's post-production place. And they all were shot with this small modified camera and the frame grabber and a time-based corrector after that, so that they could be recorded onto 1-inch. And so anyway, that was an interesting experience of how 30p was acceptable to people as film, and no one ever thought that they weren't film. And so anyway, that's what happened there. Now, in 1993, our little team of people had eventually put together a complete actually running a 24 frame per second system. And that system, of course, added 3.2 pull down, so that system could actually be recorded on a standard tape machine. Remember, back then it wasn't common at all to record onto hard drives or anything. I mean, I'm sure that technology existed, but not in the real world. The people were still using tape back then. So we built this thing, and it actually did 24p, and it actually looked pretty damn good. But of course, it was black and white. And as I said earlier, this was to be a technology demonstrator. And what I wanted to do was take this thing and the video from it and try to go to camera companies and sell them on the idea that, you know, this would be a great product. It'd be the holy grail of production if you guys could make a camera that did what this one did, only in full color and all the other stuff. So anyway, that's where things sat. And we decided to apply for a patent on it, which we did back in, let's see, the patent we did was filed in 1994 on the idea of creating this 24 frame thing. And in 1995, the patent office, United States Patent Office issued us patent 5475425. And if you guys go to the United States Patent Office, you can actually look up that patent and see all the details and the block diagrams of how this camera actually worked, the final version of it. We never actually used that because, quite frankly, no one wants to shoot a TV commercial in black and white. And so we always hoped that something would come along, but nothing ever did. But that formed the block diagram of how that was done. And anyway, to carry on from where we just left off there, on the 24p timeline, in the year 2000, which was, well, 6 years after that. And by the way, we were having no success getting any of the electronics companies interested in the idea of doing a 24p television camera or a camera that could do that function. As a matter of fact, I can't relate to you the guy's name because it wouldn't be fair to him. But we got a very nice letter back from a major electronics company explaining that there's no reason that they could see that they would want the image and the purity of the way they were doing a camera now with interlacing and all. They wouldn't want the purity of that to look steppy like we were showing on our test videos. And so anyway, it was a hard sell, let's put it that way. And as I said, at the same time, I'm working on other jobs and all, so it wasn't like I was spending the rest of my life trying to do this thing. And in 2000, right before Larry Thorpe made this announcement, Sony made an arrangements with our people and licensed the patents from us that we had. And it was a one-time license fee, and that was that as far as Sony goes. And Larry Thorpe, who in my humble opinion and somewhat educated opinion is the smartest guy that has ever worked in the world of electronics and television. When you think of all that he did at RCA and then at Sony, and anytime you see that Cine Alta logo, it's something to do with what Larry originated over there at that company. You know, he's an amazing man, and the camera that he came out with, of course, was the F900, and that was 3 CCDs, full high definition. It had progressive scan, and it was a HD cam format camcorder. And that camcorder was unique because when you switched it into 24 frame mode, the tape deck system actually slowed down. So you got 30 minutes if you were recording at 29.97, but if you switched it to 24 frame or 23.976, the entire mechanism, head wheel, and everything else slowed down to make up for it. So suddenly you had a 40-minute tape instead of a 30-minute tape, which was great. So anyway, the F900 was a big deal back then. And if you remember, the F900, or the Panavision version, where they put a Panavision lens mount on the front of it, was what shot the movie Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones. And this was a really big deal. And Larry Thorpe's Larry Thorpe's vision was far, far bigger than mine. Larry Thorpe wanted to replace film in general, including in the movie theater and all. And ours was just to be standard definition and to be something to replace film that was on television. But he had a bigger outlook and a bigger thing than anything we did. And in 2002, Panasonic introduced the DVX 100, and this was an amazing little camera. They had licensed our patents also. Panasonic did, and this little camera was only about this big, but it had a built-in 10-to-1 lens. It had a neat little section here where you could switch between normal shooting, like normal 29.97, or you could shoot at 24 frame progressive. And then it added the 3.2 pull down like our original patent showed. And then it recorded on a standard mini DV cassette. And that recording was compatible with any mini DV player that existed at the time. And it was quite a thing. And it was also the first affordable 24p camcorder. It was, I believe, the selling price originally on that thing was $3,500, if I remember, and it became super popular with wedding photographers. It became popular with TV stations that had a documentary unit within the station where they went out and do investigative journalism and things, and it became very, very popular with independent guys that were doing corporate videos and all. As a matter of fact, they introduced three separate improvements on it, the DVX B and the C, or I think it was, or the A, B, and C or something. But anyway, it literally was a big deal back then because of its cost. And we decided that it was time for ad agencies to hear about this 24 frame thing. And this sounds so crazy, but in the advertising world back in 2002, they still thought of film is here and videotape is here. Now, we were making a decent amount of money on the film part of it, so this was kind of anti-productive to us. But we wanted to show clients that there was an option where they could shoot at a relative expense of normal video, but produce the same look of movie film. And so I thought, well, it's time for the ad agency people to know about this. So we produced, using that little DVX 100, we produced a standard definition video that was a couple minutes, 3 minutes long, and sent it to every ad agency that we knew. And we had about 400 or 500 ad agencies on our list, on our mailing list and all. And we wanted them to see this new technology and to think of it if they wanted to do something, that was higher quality than just a normal, video ad, that this could actually suffice for film. And of course, we wanted them to think of us if they decided they had to do that. So anyway, I thought I'd show you guys what the ad agency people saw when we sent this thing out. And this was frequently, from what we were told, the first time anybody at the ad agency world ever even heard of something called 24p and the capabilities it had. Now, we shot this, as I said, on the DVX 100. Right now, you're watching scenes that were shot on a 24p digital camera that was designed to emulate the look of motion picture film. Although I've directed and photographed literally hundreds of television commercials, shooting them in 35mm, the one thing that all the spots had in common was that they were all posted in video and, of course, distributed on video. In the late 80s, I began to ask if it would be possible to design a TV camera whose sole purpose was to emulate the look and feel of motion picture film that had been transferred to video. As part of our original research, I shot some test scenarios with a 35mm motion picture camera mounted on the same platform as a conventional broadcast TV camera.
What do you mean?
Casting agent Debbie Doherty volunteered to play a dramatic role in one of these tests. We then edited the material and analyzed the technical as well as the esoteric differences between the film and the conventional video. Our team started to work on a progressive scan camera system that would effectively shoot at 24 frames per second Yet the output video signal was to be compatible with normal American TV standards.
In the early 90s, we applied for worldwide patents on this technology. The driving force behind our efforts was economics. As an executive producer of TV commercials, it's obvious to me that the preferred medium of origination is 35mm film. But sometimes, the only drawback is cost. This 1,000-foot roll of 35mm Eastman color negative costs $611, and it runs through the camera in just 11 minutes. And it costs $280 to process, leader, and clean it. Then between $400 and $700 per hour to transfer it to DigiBeta. And that doesn't take into account overnight shipping, sync-ups, and other expenses. Now, when you consider that the average 30-second commercial uses about 7,000 feet of film, the cost to buy the film, process it, and transfer it can quickly jump to tens of thousands of dollars. The thought of producing 35mm quality spots without the expensive film is what fostered our investment in what the industry now calls 24p.
These circuit boards here are from our original prototype camera. The first time we really put it to use was in 1991.
I talked to my pharmacist at Thrift. What he does is he takes time. He listens to me. Oh, okay, that may sound like a small thing to you, but...
At that time, I directed a multi-spot, black and white thrift drug campaign for Ketchum Advertising. Everyone thought the commercials were shot on film.
Really sure.
In 1995 and 1998, the U.S. Patent Office issued these two patents for our efforts. For licensing purposes, a few years ago, we packaged our patents with those of Burbank, California's Film Look Incorporated.
24p is not the magic bullet. It won't save a bad concept, and you still need good lighting and creative direction. Does 24p digital video look exactly like film? No, but 95% of the audience won't notice any difference. It's the ideal origination medium for time-sensitive or budget-conscious projects.
Thanks for your interest in Przyborski Productions. We look forward to the opportunity of working with you on either your film or your 24p projects.
Anyway, that was the first time that quite a few ad agencies ever got to hear or to even think about this new technology called 24p. And anyway, to wrap up, I just wanted to go through a quick timeline of how things happened after that point. And to start with, Dalsa, who you may not know that name, but Dalsa is a company from Canada that makes very high-end imaging, CCDs and CMOS devices. As a matter of fact, they make some of the imagers that are in the Mars rover, from what I understand. And so to even be in that category, you got to be pretty damn good. But they introduced a camera called the Dalsa Origin. It was a pretty good size camera. And it was the first camera back in 2003 that had a 35mm sized imager, and it shot 4K video. Now, they only made 2 of those cameras totally, 2 of them, and they never sold them. They only rented them, and they were used in, from what I understand, 4 or 5 different commercial campaigns, as well as certain scenes in certain movies where it was kind of a unique thing that replaced film at the time they were being used. Then in 2007, everyone's familiar with Red Digital. Red shipped their first Red 1 digital camera, and it had the CMOS, which is complementary metal oxide semiconductor, the CMOS 35mm sized imager, and I believe every camera that I know of from now on has a CMOS imager. So that camera had to be a pretty big landmark. I used that camera on a number of shoots, and the very first one they came out with wasn't reliable. The current Red ones are very reliable and are very, very good. The first ones were just a new camera with a new company, and it was you had to constantly update the firmware and all. But the new ones are pretty damn good. And in 2008, the amazing Canon 5D Mark II came out, and this was the, as I wrote here, the first DSLR that could shoot 24-frame video using a full-frame 36 by 24 millimeter CMOS imager. And this camera changed everything. And today, any still camera that you buy can shoot 24p, and it was all because of the success of that 5D Mark II. They all shoot video. It was the first time a digital camera, you just flip a switch and it became a video camera. And it was quite an amazing thing for them to put that thing together and to put it out on the market. I think it sold for about $5,000. Of course, I was one of the first in line to buy it and to see what it was like. And it was quite a camera. It had Morey pattern problem and it had aliasing problems, but for a first generation thing, it changed the industry in still photography, that's for sure. Then in 2010, a big deal happened. Arriflex introduced the Alexa, and I'm not talking about the the Alexa that Amazon has. This was their standard digital camera, and it had the industry standard Arriflex PL, which stands for positive lock, the standard PL mount, and that camera had a 52 millimeter flange distance, which was the same as all Arriflex movie cameras. It had literally any lens that a cinematographer had that would fit on an Arriflex 35 millimeter movie camera would fit on the Alexa, and it would produce about the same size image. And suddenly the big end cinematographers that were always, it was beneath them to shoot video of any sort. It was like, oh, well, we're film guys, we're not the video guys. There's some video guys over there. Well, as soon as the Alexa came out from their favorite company, Arriflex, and by the way, it's pronounced Arriflex and Arri, it's not pronounced Ari as all these YouTubers say. But when Arriflex came out with that camera, they suddenly had to say, well, maybe I should look into this. And you'll find that in the Academy Awards this year, probably 60 or 70% of the films will have been shot with an Arri Alexa and their current version of it. And in 2011, it was kind of the bar stool being kicked out from the film guys because Panavision, Arriflex, and Aton all announced that they would no longer be making any more film cameras. And that kind of like sends a shockwave of a message throughout the entire industry to say something like that. And then following the next year, Fuji in 2012 announced that they are ending all motion picture film manufacturing. And of course, if you don't have film, you're not going to be able to shoot film. Now, to let you folks understand, because probably none of you have ever bought movie film before, or maybe one or two of you, it used to be Kodak and Fuji were the two that supplied camera film. They were both Kodak was probably king of the hill, certainly, but Fuji was unique in that you could get a deal with Fuji. So if you were shooting something, Fuji had a film stock called Eterna, and it was super popular for sitcoms or things like the show Friends and different things where they were shooting on film, using a lot of film. Well, Fuji would give you a deal. And if you were doing something, you could call the rep, and you might get, on a particular week, you might pay for 8 rolls and get 10 1,000-foot rolls, depending how their stock was flowing. And you could always get something off on Fuji, usually, unless you were just buying 1 or 2 rolls. Kodak never gave a discount. They never gave a discount to anybody. As a matter of fact, the Kodak rep would tell you, you know, Glenn, you're paying the same for your film as Steven Spielberg would pay for his film. I said, well, that's fine. He's a multimillionaire and I'm not, so what kind of plus thing is that? He said, no, they don't get deals out in Hollywood. They pay the same price. Well, well, whatever. But anyway, that's once Fuji stopped making film, and the other reason Fuji stopped making film, and most prints that you were watching in movie theaters was actually printed on Fuji film, because it was a less expensive way for laboratories to buy movie films for these massive runs. Like, for example, the movie Titanic was, they would go through tons of film. Well, if they were using Fuji film, it looked the same as Kodak film and for all practical purposes in the movie theater, but it was cheaper. It processed exactly the same. And once the digital cinema thing took over and digital projectors replaced real projectors, suddenly, what is Fuji going to be making this film for? They don't need to make the film anymore. And to pretty much wrap things up here, if you look at where 24p digital imaging versus film is today, 24p is included in virtually every camera made that shoots video. and that's pretty much a fair statement. All the current ones that I've ever seen have that function ability in it, and the latest CMOS imagers exceed film's dynamic range. If you were to shoot a film today, you would buy, if you wanted to shoot it on film, you would buy Kodak's 5219. That's the standard emulsion that's any movie made that shot as movie film is shot on 5219. And that is considered to have 14 and a half f-stops that means where you could see detail in the darkest area and detail in the brightest area of the scene. 14 and a half f-stops, which is pretty damn good. But the latest imagers, for example, Red has an imager now that does 17 f-stops from dark to light, and the latest Aeroflexes are advertised at 15, but people have said that they're actually doing more than 15 f-stops on those cameras. So anyway, the high-speed digital cameras now shoot higher frame rates than was ever possible on film cameras. Now, I've shot a lot of slow motion, especially in food photography over the years, and like falling vegetables and different things. And 360 frames per second was the fastest you could shoot 35 millimeter film and have it actually be pin registered each frame. Now, of course, there's cameras that shoot at god-awful speeds, but they use what's called a rotary prism. In a rotary prism, the film never stops. This prism just bends the light around on the film as it comes. You don't get distinct frame lines, and the one picture sort of blends into the next. It's more than adequate for studying the ballistics of a missile or something like that, but it's useless if you were shooting, a scene for a movie where you wanted true slow motion. So 360 was the limit on how fast 35 millimeter film could be transferred through a movie camera. Well, right now, in full high definition, which 1920 by 1080, there's cameras that are running up to 4,000 to 6,000 frames per second at that resolution. And now there's cameras that are at 1,000 frames per second shooting full 4K at full resolution. So you can see that's a lot higher than film could ever do. And now the 6K and 8K digital cameras far exceed 35 millimeters resolution. The newest cameras, for example, Sony has a new camera out there that's been out for quite a while. It's called the Venice, and their latest iteration of it is, I believe, a 6K or an 8K imager, and it's higher resolution than film. And of course, the latest ARRI LF, which is large format ARRI, is far higher resolution than movie film can do. And anyway, so we're getting down to the point where what does film have going for it? But Kodak still makes motion picture film. And by the way, a current roll of 1,000 foot roll, which is about this big, of Eastman color negative, that 5219 I was telling you, sells for $783 a roll, and it will cost you $200 to get it processed. And that doesn't include, transferring it to video or anything. So you got basically $1,000 on motion picture film for every 11 minutes of film. And so you could see that's quite a decent amount of money. And but film is still used. People say, well, Glenn, does anyone use film? Yes. For example, if you saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I believe it was the Quentin Tarantino movie, that was all shot on motion picture film and of course transferred to video and edited on digital. And the latest James Bond movie that's out in the theaters right now, that was shot on 35 millimeter film and of course post-produced digitally. And anyway, so the two mediums still exist. Probably at the Academy Awards this year, you'll see quite a few winners that are shot on the Alexa, maybe one or two on a Red, and the rest will be shot on motion picture film. So anyway, that's where things stand right now. And I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate you asking me to talk about this, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. So.
We have a Q&A thing. No questions have been asked at this point. Glenn's got the finish up. Shouldn't that have scratch marks through it and pocket holes?
Well, it could maybe, but it was just a still frame. I saw, John. There's quite a few things that say chat with the name.
Yes.
There's a 26, whatever that means. I'm not familiar with this, but
I'm looking here. Let's see. Well, absolutely remarkable talk. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks so much. A lot of kudos for your presentation. And, I lived through that period, Glenn, like you. And there were a lot of details in there that I didn't realize, that I hadn't really, because I was more on the engineering side, I really didn't, and certainly the video side. So I didn't know that. I can theoretically turn on anybody's microphone and allow them to talk to you. Usually participants, attendees are muted. So I don't know
I've got one, John. If while other
Yeah,
people
Ed.
are thinking of their questions, if you want to submit a question, use the Q&A button on your screen, and hopefully we'll get a couple questions. But I'm going to keep my camera off because it won't stop glitching. Glenn, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I also enjoyed your photos. Recognized a lot of people from back in the day.
yeah,
in your,
there was
in your
quite a
photographs.
few.
It was,
And the
it was
worst
quite
part is almost all the friends that I knew are dead. I mean,
Yeah,
in the
I
picture,
know,
I didn't realize that till I was putting it together.
Yeah, there was quite a community back in those days, and everybody worked with everybody else. It was really pretty great. But and I've edited a lot of stuff you've shot, and and worked on it. One question I had was I saw a mention of film look in your presentation, and film look has always been kind of a mystery to me. And I've sent countless finished spots and rolls of video footage out the film look, back years ago when I did a lot of editing, and it came back, and we used it as it was. I didn't really feel whether it looked any different than what I sent out, but there definitely was a look. But I wondered what was going on in that process. Were they electronically trying to do what you were doing with your cameras?
Well, we got to be friends with them, and only because of the fact that if you're going to license a patent, the ideal thing that companies like is that they're making one deal and handling the entire area of that patent, for example. And FilmLook had a couple patents that dealt with different aspects of trying to create a film look, as well as a television camera theoretical type patent. And we decided to group ours with his, and in that way, when Sony and different companies licensed this thing, they signed off on one license, and it literally covered every aspect of the of that subject matter. So that's how we got involved with them. I don't know how his process worked. I know it was a videotape to videotape thing through a electronic box that was custom made that they did. And I know when I was out at his facility once at Film Look, they were doing Disney shows that were previous shows that were shot on videotape that they were converting over to look like they were shot on film. So I guess he did quite a bit of business doing that.
Yeah, they're still around as far as I know. I get emails from them. I guess they make a lot of plugins for editing and effect plugins and things. So it's nice to see that they're still around. So
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks again. It was really great.
All right. And
I see some questions, Glenn. I assume you can see them too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just clicked on that. All right here. It says, was film stock versus the video sensor sensitivity an issue, especially as it impacted exposure and depth of field? Not really. Film was always sold over the years as different ASAs, or ISO as it's called now. It used to be always ASA, American Standards Association, instead of the International Standards Organization. But you could buy 100 ASA, or you could buy, the next step was 500, and I think that 500 was the highest that 35 millimeter film was, color film. but I'm not sure that I've never bought anything higher than 500. But it says as versus video sensor. No, what's happening now is that every video sensor that you see. As a matter of fact, I have one of my favorite cameras right now is this thing here, which is this is a Fuji X-T4, and they almost all the cameras now have an 800 ISO as the standard ISO, and that's more than what you need unless you're doing police work at night or something, or trying to catch someone in a parking lot or something at night. But the 800 ISO is to me an excellent speed, and I still shoot quite a few hospital ads. We work with there's ads on right now in Pittsburgh for Excella Healthcare when I do all their ads and all. And the 800 ISO I've shot in operating rooms where it's very low light and you just use faster lenses or switch it to 1600 ISO, and that camera is pretty damn clean. But as far as the sensitivity, so anyway, it affects depth of field. Everyone that if they want super shallow depth of field, of course you put a neutral density filter on the lens and then open the lens up to a as wide as it'll go, and that'll be the most shallow depth of field. But it says, Glenn, have you ever shot in 70 millimeter? No, but my dad has tons of shots in 35 and 70. And how do you know about current uses or advances there? They still make 70 millimeter in the movie world is actually 65 millimeter film. And the reason it's 65 is that when it is made into a print, the edges become 5 millimeters wider to accommodate the magnetic soundtracks. So the camera actually runs 65 millimeter film, and then the outer edges on the print stock become the magnetic things. That's the way they do, IMAX and all that other stuff. I've never had the opportunity to work on that. My dad has shot 70 millimeter was a real common film stock out at Cape Canaveral. There was always 70 millimeter running, and it doesn't run as fast as you think because the frames. Now they were using full frames. They didn't want like what people are shooting 70 now. I'm trying to remember the director that he always shoots 70 millimeter. I'll think of his name in a second, but they only have 2 sprocket holes higher than the normal 4 sprocket hole pull down of 35. So even though the film is much wider, it's only running another, I think that would be another half again faster. So a 1,000-foot roll would become, I think, 7 minutes instead of 11 minutes, the way it is on 35 millimeter. It said, have you ever shot? No. So the answer is no, I never did. My dad it was funny during, when he was working out there, they would encourage, it's hard to believe different things the way it would be. They would encourage him to take movie cameras home when new stuff came out and practice loading and unloading the cameras and stuff. I mean, that would be, hey, Joe, take this thing home and this is a brand new whatever, and they did that because it was cheaper than, RCA could tell him to do that. But anyway, he would take it home and I would, of course, play with it while it was home. So it, and we used to shoot, people saw maybe in the earlier part of the video where I was explaining how I used to shoot these 16 millimeter little films that we did, these 3 to 5 minute little films. And my dad was able to get that stuff processed at the Patrick Air Force Base lab, which handled all the Air Force film that was done at Cape Canaveral, because the amount we were doing was inconsequential. We would shoot, say, 400 feet. Well, they could splice that at the end of a 120,000-foot run of movie film and not even know it was there. So, anyway, I guess that's it, huh?
Yeah, Glenn, I don't see any more questions, and you thoroughly covered it. I have to say it was Very interesting, mostly because it was a combination of engineering and creativity that made it happen. Most people just take 24p for granted. I guess the camera manufacturer made it, So it was a real interesting look into the history of it. Thanks very much.
Oh, sure, welcome. Someone asked,
Yeah, catch that one.
what are you recording your Zoom session on? Well, I have here a Fuji X-T3 camera, and it has a 35 millimeter Canon lens on the front of it. So.
Yeah, I told Glenn he was embarrassing me with my piece of crap Logitech webcam, but I couldn't do any better.
No, it's all you need to have, really. I just did this because we end up doing so many pre-pro meetings on video anymore, because of COVID, and COVID has changed everything. It's really and quite frankly hurt our business because so many clients just can't, and who knows what we're running into now with the new strain and all this other stuff and how things are coming. We've had numerous shoots that were either they eventually got canceled, but they started out being moved back because we have to, if you remember, everything stopped at one point where you weren't allowed to do anything. And we had 3 huge projects at that time that one of them came through at a later date, but the other one just disappeared. And a lot of companies, I see things changing, and the whole industry is changing, and a lot of companies are actually recording or doing their own commercials now internally. I know of one that's I can't mention their names on the camera here, but where it used to be a good thing that we were doing at least twice a year, and now it's being done internally by people and for a tiny fraction of the cost. And you like to think that it would have been better if you did it, but it's it's water over the dam, and whatever it is probably working for them, or they wouldn't keep doing it. So anyway.
Well, again, Glenn, thanks so much. We've pretty well run the entire time of the meeting with your presentation, and that's great. Yeah, thanks. I see a lot of thanks here in the chat session. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's great.
I just want to make a
good.
few.
I'm hopefully people, and I know a lot of the older guys that are part of SMPTE probably remember the stockings on lenses and all kind of crap that we went through.
I remember it
then.
at TPC. Yeah.
And that was I thought we'd have a little bit of a fun talking about that because, I don't, in today's world of post-production, with the sophisticated color correction ability, and of course now it's called color grading because they've adopted the British terminology for it. But at least you can, if you have a decent camera of any sort, you can make a really good-looking picture out of it. And as proof of that, there's a commercial running. Did you see the one now running for somebody where they actually shot it on an iPhone?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the iPhone has you figure it has, one of these has more capabilities than what we used to drag around with a camera that weighed 150 pounds. And so it's a fun time.
But as you said, Glenn,
to be in.
You can take that iPhone, but if you have bad lighting, a bad concept, bad acting, the whole thing goes down the dumper.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it doesn't matter if it's 24p. Now, you asked me before about now they're using, what is it, one camera during a football game that's a larger imager camera.
Yeah, maybe some of the other people who are listening in would be interested in that. Sony is providing a Super 35 single imager camera that is being used for typically for close-up shots with a short depth of field, which is, of course, very difficult for the cameraman, but it does move your eye to the object they want you to see because everything else is out of focus. I think it's an experiment. I don't know if it'll work, but I'd be interested if you have an opinion, or anyone else, on
Well,
where
my
that's
opinion
going.
is it's they're trying to fix something that isn't broken once again.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
And when you're
Yeah.
watching a live, there's a certain look. I understand from a guy who told me this, and I don't know if it's true. I've never been able to prove it, but on the 24p thing, I always imagined when we started that whole thing that this would be incorporated into big time cameras, but would never find its way into small consumer stuff, because I didn't think anyone would ever want to do that in the small world. They were there shooting their kid or their dog running around or something. But as it turns out, that's not the case, obviously. And it's the same with that imager thing with the thing. When you watch a football game, there's a certain look that like NEP's cameras have. It's just a live, gorgeous look where you see everything, and that's what you expect to see on your big TV. And whether or not the scene is, where it's shallow depth of field, to me that doesn't add or subtract anything from the game or what you're watching. As a matter of fact, it makes you think, what's different about that camera rather than all the other ones, or something like that. But anyway, I understand what I was trying to say here is that. I always kind of thought they could shoot soap operas in 24p, and they would look like they were movies rather
Yeah,
than.
it sounds
the
reasonable to
traditional
me.
thing. Right, that's a thought that I had. Well, I was told that they actually did that once or twice, because as George will tell you, the newer Sony cameras, I believe, have that function where you can switch into the 24 frame mode on the broadcast cameras, and do stuff like that. Anyway, I was told that they did that, and when they did, the audience, the women, and primarily that watch those soaps, did not like that at all. They like to feel that it's a live thing that's happening as they watch it, not something that's been done in the past, which film always looks like it's not real. It looks like it's something that's been done previously and being shown to you. They like the idea that a soap opera is an original thing that's happening live while they're watching it. Of course, they're not. They're on tape, but or on digital file. But anyway, I was told that it was tried once or twice and it wasn't a successful attempt.
Most of the Super Bowl halftime shows are shot in 24p, and of late have been shot with area Alexas,
Oh yeah,
systemized to look different than the game.
yeah.
Yeah,
can see
and
that.
that makes more sense, I think, than intercutting a film look, for lack of a better term, in the middle of a sports game.
It's a new piece of equipment that needs to be played with. So, and Sony is now providing Venice cameras, and there is actually a Sony large format single imager studio style camera now that
Oh really? Yeah.
has all the handles and stuff so that it can easily integrate into
The Venice is going to get a lot of play because all the new what's it called, Avatar movie, the Avatar 2 and Avatar 3, which are both being done at the same time, are both being shot on the Venice. That I think Sony is providing those cameras to them to do the show, but
And not
frame
in
of it-
3D, right, Glenn?
No 3D, no,
Right.
just
No, the 3D, if there is some, will be done synthesized later on, much
Yeah.
simpler process. I think one of the things that is worth pointing out in discussion of why filmmakers like film is there's just a lot less pyrotechnics and gack and stuff going on set. It's a film camera, you can't mess with it. There's no imaging technician. Obviously, there's some electronic displays that allow the director to see what the camera is shooting, but you spend more money on film and perhaps save money on time on set because of mucking around with electronic cameras.
Yeah, and that was especially true back when you had the separate big 2-inch machine, or 1-inch machine, and you had you had to have all kinds of technicians, the registration charts, and all the stuff that you needed back in those days. And now it's the video stuff is like, I enjoy. It's funny how clients that we've dealt with for years will say, "Glenn, don't you really miss that this isn't film we're shooting?" And I will frequently say, "Oh yeah," but I don't miss it that much at all, because there was always that feeling when that film left that, my God, some kid that was going to high school is processing this in the middle of the night. So I mean, this stuff is being touched by people that may not have any concern for this, and FedEx could lose it, and all. I mean, it was always all that. Now when we record everything that we shoot, like at a hospital, there's 3 separate full bandwidth recordings made at the same time, 2 separate SD cards, and we're feeding a non-compressed to a one of these Atmos Shogun things, and it's recording also. So we have three recordings that any one of them, if it was dead, we could get this footage back without any thought. So they all have the same time code. They all have the same audio. So anyway.
Well, sort of belt and suspenders.
Yeah, you're getting things like that. I wish that I know a lot of these guys that there's 43 things in the chat. I can't watch them or read them when I touch it, so I don't know how that works. But
well,
anyway.
I don't think many of them are addressing to questions to you. I mean, I see an R.I.P. Marty, and things. Thanks, Glenn.
Oh, okay.
Awesome session. But
All right,
they're
great.
really not questions.
All right,
so
good.
much.
I thought we were skipping over somebody's question, but
And everybody should know we record these, and these will be on YouTube. So if they missed anything, they can tell their friends and check it on YouTube. I'd like to bring this meeting to a close now, if it's okay. The next meeting and presentation will be in February. The date and topic is to be determined. Check with SMPTE.org, or we'll be sending out notices here in the Pittsburgh section. And you can see all the section meetings from all over the world on the SMPTE website, as well as their on-demand sessions from the Advanced Technology Conference that was recently held. And last but not least, I'd like to wish everyone happy holidays, and especially you, Glenn, for your great presentation. Thanks very much.
yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Glenn.
you. And,
Yeah,
and I
thanks a lot.
enjoyed meeting you guys, and of course I knew Ed before, and I enjoyed meeting you, George. So anyway,
Yeah, we'll have to have a cup of coffee and talk more about adventures.
That would be
in
great.
movie and
that would be great, because I got I talked briefly there about Larry Thorpe, who is like he's like an idol of mine, and once John Humphrey dropped him off at our office, and I got to talk with him, and then drove him out to the airport, and he's just an amazing person. That's the behind the scenes TV that people I hope appreciate the guy.
Well, I know
because,
John wants to turn this thing off, but I will say that I worked with Larry at RCA.
Oh, did you at RCA?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, he was. He
Say
had the
good night,
first-
John.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Well, thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you, Glenn. And
No, you're
thanks,
welcome.
everyone, for attending. We had a great turnout tonight, and I appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to
All
end the
right.
meeting now. And again, happy holidays.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.